Hello everyone, and welcome back to Constantine's adventure. Last we left off, she had just finished up a contract with the Daedric prince Clavicus Vile, which led her to obtaining the mask of Clavicus Vile. She then hunkered down in Helgen for the evening, a little unsure of what her next course of action might be, but she did choose to take this downtime and study a little bit of magic. Over time, she'd been accruing several different spell tomes, be them whether she bought them or found them off of willing participants. But without the time to actually study, these books were starting to do very little good for her. She chose the alteration spell Harvest, an incredibly useful spell that would help her in recovering ingredients. This way, she wouldn't have to have her nose to the ground picking every flower she came across. After a quick study session of several hours, in which she was actually able to properly learn the spell, she then chose to lay her head to rest due to the exhaustion. A new morning brings new adventure. Well, okay, in this case it was more along the lines of just leaving Helgen. She thought it best to return to Falkreath and see what she could do there, see what jobs were available, as she needed a little bit of a break, as working for a Daedric prince is exhausting. As she walked, she came across a lone Argonian traveler who was just a bit too bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for Constantine's liking. Now, she didn't have anything against positivity. Positivity is good. It was just the overwhelming amount of it that she had a problem with. She said her son was a wanderer, but he died from a bandit or something like that. Constantine grew irritated with how overtly optimistic and positive the Argonian was. She appeared to have no real concept of danger. Constantine stopped the conversation, but a dark thought crossed her mind, and she decided to indulge in it. She would try her pickpocketing skills. If she was caught, oh well. If not, well, then she knows she's getting better at it. She stole a few items before being caught, which then led the Argonian to immediately enter attack mode. It seems she wasn't as naive as Constantine had first assumed she was. No matter, though, it wasn't much of a fight anyways. She did leave the body on the side of the road with no family left and nobody knowing where she was. It's not like she was going to have anyone looking for her, and more specifically, looking for revenge. That was dark, she thought to herself as she continued towards Falkreath. There really wasn't any reason, it was just a dark impulse. Something she felt almost obligated to do, whether she wanted to or not. A feeling she quickly stuffed deep back into her psyche. She needed a job to do, one that would continue to give her standing in Falkreath. Having finally arrived back in Falkreath, after a quick stop home to send items back to the museum, Constantine knew it was time to go get herself just a nice and simple job. She was hoping to find a quick and easy bounty, hopefully. One that wouldn't cause too much stress and she could make some quick gold off of. She was, thankfully, able to find one. Her task was to go to Knife Point Ridge and kill the bandit leader, which, in case you didn't know, in Constantine speak, meant make sure there wasn't a living being left. After an extremely relaxing sleep, Constantine had headed for the forge to look for Laud to update him on the dog. And, honestly, more specifically, she just hoped to get paid for it. As well, she needed to pick up some supplies to continue building her house and just for the road in general. She was about to set off for Knife Point Ridge when she spotted Jarlath, the child-murdering Thalmor Justiciary, and she was walking away from people. Constantine stopped, and then she started to follow. This may be her chance to finally rid the world of this god's-awful elf. Constantine needed to be careful. Official Thalmor or not, she knew that Jarlath was capable of a lot. Exactly what, she was unsure. As a Thalmor, Constantine knew that Jarlath most likely carried some level of decent weaponry and the training to use it, as well as she practiced in some form of magic. Now, what that magic might be, she's not totally sure of. Her goal would be to wait for Jarlath to sit, or otherwise be away from a majority of the people, and then put one right between her eyes. This was a good spot, and a fitting one. Jarlath would die in the graveyard, making moving the body a heck of a lot easier. All she needed to do now was wait so that no passerbys would see her. When Constantine believed herself safe, she let an arrow fly, hitting Jarlath right in the leg and taking her to the ground. Unsure of the amount of damage she actually did, she shot again, this time sinking the arrow clean into her back. Assuming she was now dead, that was when she rose, much to Constantine's absolute shock. She then put 2 more arrows into Jarlath to absolutely no avail. She had no idea what was going on. She just took the arrows. That damn blasted elf magic. Fine. You'll deal with this another time. At least nobody saw her. Frustrated, she walked away from her attempted killing, and thankfully Laud was now back at his forge. She spoke to him about the dog, and he surprisingly paid her.
Yeah.
She then picked up a few supplies from the local trader and headed out. It was now time to hit Knife Point Ridge and deal with these bandits.
Here. It's not much, but take it anyway.
As she walks, Constantine tries to understand how Jarlath didn't die. What sort of magic protects in full against arrows? It could have been one of the skin magics, like how she uses stone skin, but Constantine didn't see the magic get cast. And Octa's recital only works when there's danger nearby, but Constantine had been hidden. There's no way it could have gone off that quickly. I mean, it has to be some unknown form of elf magic that she doesn't understand. She was snapped out of her daze by a wolf attacking her, which she put down quickly enough. But, more importantly, she realized she was in front of a ruined keep. Pretty sure this wasn't Knife Point Ridge, but you never know, there could be something worthwhile inside. After obtaining the Sky Shard, Constantine was in luck. There was a band of orc hunters inside. From experience, she knew that these were not the type of hunters that focused on wild game. Well, okay, unless that game was weary travelers. No, these were a group of lowly bandits, and while nobody paid her for their death, bandits usually meant loot, and she'd consider that her payment. You know, sometimes you just shouldn't be picky about where you get your spoils. She opens in stealth, using her arrows to deal significant damage, and she was in luck. A thunderstorm had just begun, which not only masked her scent, but it also lowered their visibility in seeing her. She does make a note that her aim on targets nearby needs work, as she missed some pretty easy shots, but she's just going to blame it on the rain getting in her eyes. Constantine was unsure what to do in this position that she was in. She knew that she was surrounded, only knew where about one of the individuals were, but she just didn't know what to do, until finally she simply decided it's time to go loud. Thankfully, she wraps up the fight moderately quickly, knocking them all down, taking what she wants, and getting ready to head into the keep. When she entered the keep, she expected to be welcomed by a barrage of sword strikes. But it seems luck was on her side today, as the thunderstorm outside masked the death screams of the other orcs' companions. The ones inside were simple prey enough, going down in only 1 arrow apiece. She still hadn't found the bandit leader, though. That was concerning. She snooped around a little bit on this lower level, picking up what she could until she went to go find said bandit leader. Here's the great thing about the leader of bandit groups. They're large, dumb, and don't believe in hiding. See, this leader, he was just on the upper floor. He had to have heard his comrades die, but to Constantine, at least, it didn't look like he cared at all. He was absolutely primed for a fight, though. And you know what? Constantine was going to give him one. The issue, though, was his armor. He was wearing heavy steel plate armor, and that was a major problem. Her arrows were doing damage, but he was just a walking tank. Here's the great thing about a tank, though. You time your movements, and you stay out of range, you just won't get hit. This is what Constantine did. She kept moving out of his reach and peppering him with arrows. He would go down, even if it took a whole quiver's worth of steel. And just as planned, without a single hit on his end, he falls to his knees in submission. But see, Constantine, she doesn't do submission. She put one right in the back of his neck, sending him to whatever afterlife he believed in. She enjoyed that feeling. That last shot before she sent them on their way. The longer she had been a mercenary, the more she felt this was simply part of her calling. Sending these souls somewhere. Giving these awful bandits, these awful people, some level of kindness in the end. Simply sending them on. Though, nothing like the Priests of Archay. No, those guys, they're pretty pacifistic, and they also abhorred necromancy, which itself is a potentially useful magical skill, one she wants to learn. No, this felt different. But she just couldn't quite put her finger on why. Either way, she really did like the feeling. She continued her looting with truly nothing noteworthy until she came across a basement in the keep. In said basement, there were rows and rows of other storehouses, which she, of course, went through. But what really caught her eye was a pedestal in the way back. It appeared to be guarded by a bunch of tripwires. She knows for a fact she did undo the tripwire, and yet she has no idea how she fell. Annoyed, after face-planting into the ground, she skirted around the rest of the wires until she actually got to the pedestal. On said pedestal were a bunch of shards to some sort of a weapon. Based on the shards, she assumed it was a dagger. She had no idea what the dagger was, but if they were being protected this badly, then they must be worth something. So, of course, like any good individual, she took them. As she left the quiet and dank hole in the ground, she tripped on another wire. Now, she was just pissed. She's usually pretty good on her feet. How she tripped is anyone's guess. In a fit of anger and annoyance, she burned where the tripwire would have been. It's not like it actually would have done anything, but it did make her feel better. Heading back outside, it's still raining and thundering, but it'll at least cover her approach as she makes her way closer to knife point. As she makes her way through the dense forest, she comes across an abandoned shack, though it's admittedly not the shack that caught her attention. Her early warning system kicked in, and she noticed a mage putting up their magic wall. It only took one arrow to put her out of her misery. By the looks of her, she was most definitely a necromancer, albeit not a very strong one. She didn't even re-attempt to awaken the dead. Pretty weak, all things considered, but behind the necromancer is an altar that catches her eye. It's not an altar to any divine Constantine's aware of, and with no idea what it does, whom it communes with, or even how to activate it, she touches it, and instantly she recognizes it as a type of sacrificial altar to an unknown divine entity, but that now is not the opportune time to use it. She shakes off the feeling pretty quickly. It's probably not the smartest choice to start randomly touching altars. She continues going through the forest when she comes across yet another wooden cabin, though this one looks much less abandoned. She grabs her bow, ready for a fight, but all that's present is a dog. Even better was that he didn't seem to be hostile. Looking around the grounds, it looks like a pretty standard cabin, though the dog kinda started to follow Constantine around the grounds. Maybe he was protecting it? She heads towards the front of the cabin, where a note is addressed to an unknown party, stating that they had gone up the mountain already and that they couldn't wait any longer. Who it was addressed to, she's unsure, and the cabin itself was locked. Had they left the dog here? The dog, whose name she learned was Ulf, continues to follow her until she came across yet another strange house. This time, it was a massive house built into a giant tree. So, of course, she entered. Ulf followed her, and inside was a small yet intriguing wood elf named Ari. The two got to talking about where they came from and so on and so forth. Ari stated she was new to Skyrim and she came from Valenwood.
Can I help?
She then asked if she could join as a traveling companion for Constantine. So Constantine
Yes,
did
I
give it
suppose
some
it's not
thought,
something you see
but
very
in the
often
end
in
rejected.
Skyrim.
For now, she still just wanted
Where
to
I
travel
come from,
alone,
they're
but
very
as
common.
time went on, she did feel she wanted someone else to
Valenwood,
talk with
all the
and
way to the
kind of
south.
share adventures with.
What about you?
She also
you from
thought
here?
Ari's home might be a good place for Ulf, so she told him to hang out here and she left. Though this was not for long. She remembered the joy she had with Barbas as a companion, and she headed back immediately inside and took Ulf with her permanently. She finally had a companion. She may come back and ask Ari if she wanted to join later, but for now, she just wanted to stick with Ulf. And now, time for an adventure. That adventure took a bit of a creepy turn when Constantine and Ulf stumbled upon a burnt-out wagon with fire still actively burning. Either this was some eternal fire, or the attack was recent. Constantine went with the latter. What she noticed first, though, is that one of the bodies had been tied up in a kneeling position. It looked ritualistic, especially since most, if not all of the goods were still there. It didn't look like a robbery gone wrong, it looked deliberate. She moved on, but she was immediately confirmed on the attack as she came across a cabin surrounded by mages. It seemed they may have used those victims below for something. Not that Constantine cared, she just needed them dead. Ulf proved his usefulness in combat by single-handedly taking out one of the mages. Who's a good boy? You are, Ulf. You're a good boy. As the two moved on from that little encounter, they came across a dungeon, or at least the opening to a Nordic burial ground. This might be a good time to see if Ulf does well in these sorts of confined spaces. The beginning was pretty quiet, nothing too much of note, a couple of things here and there, but nothing too important. That is, until the two actually entered the crypt. So, Draugr woke up, which itself is not uncommon, especially for these older crypts. No, what was uncommon and put absolute fear in Constantine was her arrows and damage did absolutely nothing to them. She would fire, they would get hit, and they would just keep shuffling forward. Now, Constantine's no weakling, and she's used to danger. She tried her best. She kept putting arrow after arrow into these Draugr, and Ulf, to his credit as well, really was trying. He was biting at their haunches, doing whatever he could. That was until this other Draugr started coming up after her, swinging and slicing, and he just kept coming. She knew, if by experience, that if they even touched her, she was going to be a goner. She shouted for Ulf, and she sprinted out of the crypt with him following right behind. Finally, in the late hour of the night, she and Ulf made it to Knife Point Ridge. The base was an interesting design, as it was several smaller enclosures which made up one large base, plus the inside. The goal was to stay in stealth as much as possible and rid each enclosure without actually alerting the rest of, well, all of them. But here's the fun part, as the old saying goes, there's no plan that survives first contact with the enemy. So far, so good. The first lookout didn't know what hit him, and nobody heard his death scream. She could hear someone using an anvil further up ahead, so that would be her next target. After looting, of course. Her next shots showed just how dangerous Constantine could be when she actually took a second to aim. The frustrating part, though, was the fact that many more bandits either saw or heard that these two go down and started tracing her location. Not that this stopped them from dying either.
Anybody there?
One of the bandits was marginally smarter than the rest and chose to flank her position coming into melee range. But, as the old adage goes, never bring a sword to a bow fight, and Constantine used them as close-range target practice. You know, she thinks it went pretty well.
I'll show you what real orc can do.
Her favorite part after a good thinning of the bandit population. The spoils of war. She started going through this first section of the base, taking what she wanted. Honestly, not like they could complain. Plus, they probably stole most of it, so really, she's just rehoming the items. She had gotten quite proficient at looting and going through all the different chests and whatnot, but now it was time to move on to the next little enclosure, where it appeared only one bandit, probably out of cowardice, remained. Guess he didn't want to join his friends on the assault of the unknown. Constantine would help him rejoin them. She didn't recognize the second threat, but thankfully Ulf had. Constantine quickly spun around to deal with that next minor annoyance. After taking the high ground to check to see if there was anybody else left in the base, and seeing nobody, she dropped down and started sifting through all the different loot. The problem was there actually was another person. Constantine was kicking herself for somehow not seeing him. But again, thankfully, Ulf had smelled him. With his death, this had to be the last guy before the leader. Right? Right? It did appear to be the last guy on the exterior of the base. Constantine then climbed her way up one of the side ridges to obtain another sky shard. Some called these teardrops from the divines, as with enough of them, they can actually be used to help naturally increase her skills. It was now time to enter the actual mine at knife point, and most likely find the leader. To say she was tired at this point would be an understatement. She had spent all day going through bandit after bandit. She just wanted to deal with this guy and fall asleep. And thankfully, he was an absolute pushover. After a few good arrows to the chest and one more for his partner, the mine was officially cleared. Now, all she had to do was go around, loot, and of course, take the man's head, because, how else are you going to prove the bounty was killed? Here's the funny little debate amongst, bounty hunters. Some bounty hunters find that it's unethical to take the head, because you can, of course, also just take them captive and just escort them to the Jarl for their punishment. Constantine does not take prisoners, and will never take prisoners. This is simply an easier path forward. After doing some quick inventory management so she wasn't overburdened, she noticed that the bandit leader had died in a pool of oil. Constantine, never one to miss an opportunity to add insult to injury, burned the pool with him in it, charring his body to a crisp. And she just watched. She hated the smell, but the insult and the warning to whatever rats took over when they came here, well, that was worth it. Constantine had thought about staying the night here in the bandit camp, but something about it made her skin and hair stand on end. She wasn't sure why, but she had learned through experience to listen to that little feeling, so she and Ulf made the long trek back to Falkreath. The hike back was incredibly uneventful, and Constantine was extremely thankful for this. It had been a long day, and she just wanted to kick off her boots and rest. She could have gone to her house, but then she remembered that no bed had been made yet, so the inn was where she chose to rest her head. First off, though, she needed to drop off some spoils in the shipment container for the museum. Tired or not, she still had an ongoing job to do. Entering the inn, Constantine was glad they didn't really care about Ulf. Not that it would have stopped her from bringing him in, she's just glad no steel had to be flung around for it. She grabbed a room and headed to bed. She had a plan for the next day.
It's funny. She tells everyone how handsome and pretty they are. Mom says she does it for tips.
Oh, child, you're a little young to be learning about that. After refilling her water and getting a full meal, she's going to head out to her house on the lake. Her goal for today is to finish as much as she can on it. She had recently bought a bunch of lumber, and it was probably delivered at this point, so it was time to finally finish this and get the first stages of her house complete. Of course, first she had to go turn in the bounty as she continued to have a head on her side. She walked towards the steward and handed in the bounty. Again, what they do with the heads are not her concern. They'd probably burn it. She hopes they burn it. The steward did let her know that it didn't technically count as helping people, as the bounty board is open to anybody, and to be a Thane, she has to specifically help people, not pick up public notices. A little frustrating, but she understood. It was now time to head out for the building site. She did appreciate how close the site was to Falkreath. It would allow her to stay within the community as needed, while still giving her the privacy she wanted. With that, though, it was now time to get to work finishing up her house. As she was working, she ran out of stone for parts of the foundation. Thankfully, there are known clay and stone deposits in the area, and she took her pickaxe to them. This is where Ulf again saved her life. Apparently, there are stone golems that don't like it when you start hitting stone. This startled Constantine something fierce, and she jumped away, nearly dying from its attack. Ulf actually stepped in while Constantine was able to recoup, draw her bow, and deal with the golem. Ulf is an absolute legend for what he's already done for Constantine, and she will kill anybody who remotely threatens him. She then got the rest of the needed stone and continues working on her house. The section she's currently on is the main living structure. This time she was out of clay, and again she appreciates the deposits nearby. And again, she is attacked by a golem, though this time she is slightly more prepared, but still almost bites the dust. This is gonna be a problem until she can figure out how to get them from attacking her. With the golem's death, she heads back to her work table and finishes up her house. She then headed to the design table. With the main structure now complete, she has an east wing, west wing, and north wing in which she can put more specialized structures. She goes through many different iterations, not really knowing what she wanted until she sort of settled on, at some point, making the alchemy room, enchanter's room, and the armory. With her house now technically complete, she looked up at her handiwork and marvels at what she now created. It was finally time to actually enter the house and start with the interior decorations. And with that, folks, that's where we're going to leave Constantine for now, diligently working on the interior of her new house. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and apologies for how long this took to actually get out. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Of course, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good one.